The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here, and very pleased to welcome a friend and familiar guest, familiar face. City Manager Mark Rohloff is here this evening, and Dan is out of town, so he's not here. So he sent some questions along, but it'll just be Mark and I tonight. But anyway, thanks for being here. We appreciate it so much.
Oh, happy to do it.
And Dan wanted me to convey to you that he's sorry he can't be here. Even though he sent questions, we both just think the world of you, and you're always one of our favorite guests. So he wanted me to convey that to you. So
he probably misses out on just getting a trick question in there every once in a while. It's like, throw me off, see my look on my face.
Well, he sent them. I don't know if I'll be able to deliver them with quite the zest that he does.
Yeah.
But the first thing we want to talk about certainly is the budget and how things going on in Madison are going to impact the city. It's, so many things are up in the air still. I mean, the budget bill is, being contested in court, and aspects of it are being challenged, and it's a mess, to say the least. But if you could just kind of look at best case scenario and worst case scenario,
Sure.
and paint the good and the bad pictures for us.
Well, I'd probably start with what we know, and which is pretty sketchy right now. Nothing's changed a lot in the last 2 months. It's gone into the courts, and it sounds like even though most of this was proposed in the budget repair bill, it sounds like because the budget repair bill is being dragged out through the courts, that I think the legislature will likely just say, okay, we'll just put it into next year's budget and just get going on it that way. Mm-hmm. The state's next year budget is July 1st anyway, so we're well past the middle of May already, so we're only talking 6 weeks anyway, so yeah. My guess is that's what they'll end up doing. The numbers that we originally got from the state, and there's been a lot of talk about, the governor was going to give us tools to do things to help absorb some of the cuts they were taking. I think the word tool is now no longer, I can't use it in any other discussion because people give me this look. It's like, well, tool is generally a good word, so let's try to work with it. In the case of, I'll start with the cuts. The state is looking at cuts in about 6 categories that we know of right now, and they can change. But the number one is the state shared revenue program. And I always like I used to teach a municipal finance class, so sometimes I get my professor hat on and start talking about it. But state shared revenue was originally adopted over almost 100 years ago, and it was saying, okay, we need to, the state started collecting us an income tax and said, well, let's start distributing some of it back. That ended up morphing into sales taxes and income taxes, but essentially instead of allowing cities to collect an independent sales tax or an independent income tax, the state collects the money and then redistributes it. It's somewhat of a welfare system if you're looking for a word, that's one word that's been used in the past. But the idea is to share the revenues that the state collects with the entire state. Shared revenue, for the most part, the program that's been given to all municipalities in the state has been frozen at its same dollar amount since 1996, 15 years. So anytime it's been frozen, any increases that we've had in expenditures, and primarily personnel costs, have had to come from some other resource. And usually that's either increasing fees or increasing taxes. So that's kind of what we've been up against. So we're looking at $1,114,000 in cuts just from that one program alone. So that's a big cut right then and there. Then there are several others. Transportation aid. You heard a lot about the state taking money out of the transportation fund, which was a bad idea. And I applaud the legislature and the governor for trying to reverse that, because it's essentially a user fee that we pay when we fill up at the gas pump. And they were taking the money for other purposes and justifying it, and that was just wrong. It was intended for transportation purposes.
Sure.
Well, now they want to use it for its intended transportation purposes, but but we don't have enough money, so we're going to take some of the money we normally give in transportation aid to cities, and we're going to take a little back. It's about, I'm going to say it's about a 15% cut. But it's $400,000, so that's $405,000. So there's a number. So now we're up to $1.5 million. The recycling grant, it's only $340,000. It's the third in line, but it's probably the one that just gets me incensed the most. Mm-hmm. The recycling program was adopted 20 years ago to encourage people to recycle. It's been very successful. As the state, and the state did admit right up front, they were only going to have this in place for a few years to get us started on it. But as the markets for recyclables just didn't take off like everybody hoped they would, the state said, well, we'll keep it going for a few more years. We'll find other incentives to give to you. And then they said, well, in order to keep funding this program, we're going to collect a tipping fee at the landfill to help pay for this program. Mm-hmm. So we said, okay, we went along with that. So the tipping fee got enacted. Now the state's looking at eliminating the recycling grant program. However, they are not eliminating the tipping fee. And the tipping fee is paid for by you and me. Our garbage trucks drive to the landfill, and they pay a certain fee to the county to operate the landfill, but they also pay several bucks a ton to go to the state. And the state was originally using that money to go back and fund recycling. So it was okay, it's kind of a user fee. I can dig that. Mm-hmm. They're taking it away but keeping the money, which reminds me of this wonderful tax that was put on telephones to fund the Spanish-American War. Yes, the early 1900s. It was finally eliminated by Congress a couple years ago for the same reason, that the purpose for which it was funded no longer existed. I think we beat the Spanish, if I recall correctly, 100 years ago. And if you're going to eliminate the program, then eliminate the tax that's been imposed on it. So
otherwise, it's nothing more than yet another unfunded mandate, if you will.
Yeah, we get the mandate. Well, the governor did talk about relieving us of some of the mandates, but it was, well, we're not going to require you to do this, but meanwhile, you still can't send these things to the landfill. So it's like, well, we don't have the mandate anymore, but we still can't send it to the landfill? That sounds like a mandate to me. And again, I understand what the governor's going through. It's not a fun position to be in, but you got to talk. You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth on that one. So there's another one. Then the other one, which is sort of the state saying, sorry guys, it's just the way it happens. Because we have so much tax-exempt property in the city, from the institutions, the university, of course, the prison, the Wisconsin Resource Center, the state gives us money that is, for lack of a better term, considered in lieu of property taxes. And we get about $1,100,000 a year from the state for that. Police, fire, streets, things of those nature. Mm-hmm. They're looking at a 10% cut there. So we're looking at a $111,000 cut there. I can understand it because the state's saying we have less money to give you, but it's still hitting us hard. Yeah. And we still have the same police and fire and street needs that we did before the cut. Transit aid. You've heard a lot about with Act 10 and some of the things with unions of that. This has nothing to do with that. It's just a straight number that the state takes out of the transportation fund to give to municipalities to encourage people to ride transit. With just in the past month, with the price of gas that's been going up, or I should say the past quarter, ridership's gone up 6% now on Oshkosh Transit, just because of the price of gas. Sure. Transit aid, we're looking at a $100,000 cut. So now we're up to over $2 million. There's another one that we don't have an amount for yet. We're still trying to figure it out. It's sort of a trickle-down number that happens for the library system. It could be as little as 40, could be as much as 100. We're not even throwing that number in the mix. The numbers, the 5 programs, are $2,072,000. So that's the cut. So now we got to find $2 million to make up. The governor said he was giving us tools, and so what we did was we took it at its face value. What happens if we implement some of these changes that he proposed, specifically pensions for employees and health insurance? The state enacted Act 10 to immediately apply to their employees, and then as union contracts expire, then they would apply to our union contracts. Our union contracts don't expire till the end of this year, so for 2012, we would be in a position to perhaps get these savings. So the state had said we're going to increase the contribution for health insurance to 12%, and it varies depending on what their bargaining units are. And pension, virtually nobody pays an employee share anymore. That was bargained years ago. In lieu of pay increases, the employees were saying, the state or the city said, we'll pick up the employee share of the pension plan. And the employee share is 5.8%. If you assume that we get all the employees who are eligible, now remember, non-represented would be hit immediately with that requirement. But non-represented employees, and that includes me, I have to do full disclosure, that only represents about 1/9 of our workforce. So 1 out of every 9 employees it affects. It doesn't affect the other 8 employees. Right. That hits immediately for us, but the other employees wouldn't hit until their contracts expire at the end of this year. But also it does not affect police and fire. And you've heard a lot about that and everything. The police and fire, you can draw your own conclusions, but it's difficult as a manager to take a look at one group of employees and say, we're going to do this to you, but not to another group. Right. Now, granted, police and fire, they do a very specialized job. They put their life at risk all the time. I don't put my life at risk. I just come and talk to you, and you're safe with me. But still, it's a fairness issue with employees. And as a manager, it's hard to look one employee in the eye and say that. But even if we took every employee, and except public safety, had them go up to 12%, most of them are already paying 6 to 7% right now. The state was assuming that nobody was paying anything. Well, our employees were. So we had to only take that portion that they weren't paying right now, up to 12%. Pension, none of our employees were paying anything at this moment in time. So that 5.8% was savings immediately for everybody except public safety. For the pension, we're looking at saving $776,000. It's a good amount of money, but it's $776,000. On the health insurance side, if we took everybody up to 12%, we'd save about $252,000. So when you take the $2 million, in fact, the number actually got bumped up because transit aid got increased. Our cut wasn't $2,072,000, it's actually $2,091,000. I got updated numbers recently. $2,091,000 minus $776,000 minus $252,000, we're still $1,062,000 in the hole. So that's the number to work from. That's what we're facing January 1, 2012, before we even get out of the gate. Now, what else is coming up? If you haven't noticed, which I'm sure you have, and everybody else watching has noticed, price of gas. We were estimating paying, and I'll just do it for what we all pay at the pump, the equivalent of paying at the pump of about $3.30 a gallon. That's what we budgeted for. Beginning of the year, we were okay. Yep. But we normally are still below that average into May. Yep. And now it went down this week, but still we're knocking on $4. So we're easily 60 cents a gallon over. So, and if you can tell me what the price of gas is going to be next year, I would just love that. But neither of us know, so that's an unknown factor. In 2008, the same thing happened to us. And we ended up we were over budget by about $200,000 back in 2008. I would expect to be over budget in that category about that same in 2011. So what's going to happen in 2012? Do we budget higher? We probably are going to have to budget higher.
Yeah. Err on the side of caution.
You got to err on the side. Yeah. We have to, because it can't sit there and say, oh, we goofed up again. I can't do that. The federal Community Development Block Grant Program. You've heard a lot of stuff about the feds also trying to do balancing. And I've been there, done that. In fact, we budget every year, but we balance our budget every year. But they're looking at eliminating or cutting back on the Community Development Block Grant Program immediately by 16.5%, and then perhaps gutting it even farther or eliminating it. We currently get $900,000 a year in community development block grant funds. We're already looking at an immediate $150,000 hit right now in 2011. If that program gets cut in half or worse, we're looking at another $300,000-$400,000. So $100,000 here, $100,000 there. Pretty soon you're talking a lot of money. So we're already $1,062,000. Price of gas, community development block grants, you're probably looking anywhere from $1,200,000 to $1,500,000 that we're going to be in starting off with, and that assumes no increases in any other cost.
So that's the good scenario, right?
Yeah, I feel good about that. It's probably we're there, the good or bad. That's where we're at. Now, the bad scenario is price of gas goes up. Bad scenario is community development block grant, is gutted to 50% or more. That's sort of a bad case scenario. It's also a bad case scenario with recycling grant. I've had discussions with our legislators, and they recognize the hypocrisy that I've brought up and other people have brought up. So they're probably going to back off, but the governor's going to say, well, fine, you can put that money back, but where else are you balancing? They still have to balance their budget, and I get that totally, but we also have to balance our budget. And the one thing that you're going to hear from people is, while you may have an opinion about the employees paying more, it's a valid issue to bring up. But from a total local economic standpoint, that money is coming out of the local economy and going down to Madison. Because Madison is saying, we need more money from you to balance our budget. So we're going to give you less. We're going to allow you to make up some of that money by taking more from your employees. So effectively, it's going back to Madison. And from an economic standpoint, it's going to drag money out of every local economy in the state.
Sure.
Now, maybe it should have happened many years ago. I mean, that argument's out there, but the reality is that money is going to go right out of the Oshkosh economy, to the tune of at least $1 million. And if you take a look at the money, it's really more like $2 million. So there's Mark's cheery notice. And normally I'm so optimistic, and it's like, but I can only tell you what I know.
Well, let me ask this: How much does the city collect in taxes? Do you know offhand?
Yeah, offhand we collect about $29 million for about a $65 million general operating budget. So it's about 45% of our budget comes from property taxes.
And of that $29 million, Mark, how much do we send to the state?
Oh, that money's ours. That property tax we collect, that's ours. Because but we have to go from 29 to 65 million some other way.
Okay.
And the state gives us about $11 million in shared revenue. Now they're going to cut it back to $10 million. The state gives us $2.8 million in transportation aid. Now they're only going to give us $2.4 million. Some of our biggest revenue sources after property taxes are the state aids. $1 million for in lieu of taxes. Now, instead of $1.1 million, now $1 million. So they give us probably somewhere along the lines of 14-15 million. That gets us up to 45 million, roughly. So now we still got another 20 million to come up with through fees and charges and things like that.
All right. Well, and so the city, historically, you guys have started working on the budget around October, I think, but in recent years, it's gotten earlier that you've started it. How much earlier can you start it this year, knowing that things are kind of, in this sort of position of hold in Madison?
The council would like the budget earlier. The Long Range Finance Committee, which was created last year, would like to see the budget earlier so that they can take a look at sort of the global issues. The reality is I think the state will probably adopt the budget earlier. That's also my prediction. But they don't officially let you know the numbers until mid-September. That's pretty standard. So you can put the budget together, but you're really making a bunch of assumptions. If we were to publish a budget document before October 1st, it would be subject to change. There'd be a big asterisk on it, and the minute new numbers came in, we'd have to change things out. Health insurance is one of those big numbers that we deal with, and we're self-insured. What that means is we try to get that number down as much as possible, but the longer the year goes on, the better the number is, the more reliable it is. We can get a number in July, and it's, a margin of error probably 15%. September down to 10 or 8%. October maybe down to 5%. And then when you get to December, you say, yeah, that's really good. Budget's already been adopted by then. So there is guesswork you got to put in no matter what.
Sure.
And that's okay. But it's going to be tough to get it out earlier and be totally reliable. We can get it out, and I think what we're going to try to do maybe is try to talk about some of the global issues and get council's feedback on those things, because this $1 million net is if it's not accurate, it's certainly in the ballpark. And I think that's where we're going to have to work from.
Okay. Well, with this kind of good news, bad news kind of thing going on, obviously some cuts are going to have to be made here at the city level. What do you think is most likely to be targeted? I know everybody always says everything is on the board, but clearly something is probably a little bit more vulnerable than something else.
It's really hard to say. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to have to take a look at evaluating the services that are most important to people. Public safety is always at the top of that list. Mm-hmm. Public works is always at the top of that list. But they represent 70% of our budget. So you just can't say, well, we're going to cut everything but public safety, because you literally gut departments darn near completely. We're going to have to take a look at other options for, how do we best deliver services? And a lot of it depends on how Act 10 comes out. Are we going to look at other ways to provide services? Right now, anytime we look at contracting, we have to see if we can do it within our contracts. If that's removed, we could take a look at contracting. I'm not suggesting that we do, but that's one of the options. I don't want to reduce services, but obviously that's going to have to become one option. Take a look at all those things. But I think first thing we'll take a look at, what can we do on benefits side? Can we save any more money on benefits? Can we look at contracting for services that as a lot of people retire, there's a lot of movement going on, a lot of uncertainty with employees, and I wish they wouldn't leave because they're really valuable people. Mm-hmm. But some people are just, the baby boomers are retiring, yep. And that's totally okay. I get it. Congratulations, wish you well, tad bit jealous, have a nice day. But there are other people who are leaving out of fear, and I wish that they wouldn't do that. But some of them are concerned that certain other benefits may be taken away, and they'd rather, the saying, getting out while the getting's good. You're going to see that. You're seeing it at the state level. You're seeing it in a lot of schools, mm-hmm. And you could see it at the local level. Even at the university level. Well, I refer that to state. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Absolutely. It's happening. Some people are just deciding it's time for me to go. I just don't want to deal with the uncertainty. So those folks are looking at leaving. Now, on one hand, there's great opportunity because you can hire somebody in at a lower rate. And that's true. From an economic standpoint, that's great. But if you have a sudden brain drain out of your organization, now remember, I've only been here 3 years. My community development director has been here 1 year. Other people, my transportation director, finance director, 3 years. They've picked up a lot, but when you lose organizational knowledge, yep. You can't get it back. You have to regain it yourself. Those are going to be real tough, and we're losing a lot of middle managers. Part of the problem is because some of this Act 10 stuff applies to the supervisory and management people immediately, and some of the people who could potentially move up and take those positions are saying, why would I take a position when my take-home pay is going to be less? I have more responsibility, and I'm taking home less money. That's a real problem we have. Yeah. Now, a lot of people would say they should be happy they have a job. And it's like, yeah, but the job they're going to keep is the job they currently have. So we're going to have to bring people in from the outside to do that, and they just won't have the institutional knowledge that mm-hmm. the more seasoned people are. And you can't force people to take a promotion quick. It just doesn't work that way. Right, so right. Those are all those things have to come into play. Every service is on the table. I got to answer your question. Every service is on the table, including public safety, including public works, but including all our quality of life, whether it's parks or museum or library, any overhead, administration. But remember, there's only 2 people in the city manager's office. You don't just cut a portion of a body. You can't look at going part-time on some things. So all those things, the departments know that this day of reckoning is coming, and I've asked them to go through it with their management staff, because I need their input to see how this is going. I just can't say, well, let's eliminate that position. Well, that's the most valuable person in the department. Well, they got to tell me those things. And
Sure.
it will be a collaborative thing. It helps soften the blow, because delivering bad news is tough. But for me to just blindly deliver bad news is not good management. They're going to be collaborating with me to figure out how we're going to pull this off.
Well, one of the questions that I had for you was, what is the morale like with employees? But I think you pretty well just answered that. I mean, but I will say, in spite of everything, my dealings with City Hall in the last few months, few as they've been, but still, I've probably had more dealings than a lot of people have. It's been great. They're good people. They're helpful. They're friendly, user friendly, and so despite whatever personal things they're dealing with, I personally haven't encountered anything where they're putting that off on the customer, the taxpayer.
They've been troopers. A lot of the union leadership have come to me over this period, when there was the protest down in Madison. Is it okay if the bus picks us up here at City Hall at 4:30 after our shift ends? Well, sure. It's a parking lot. It's a public building. Go for it. Please don't conduct business, union business during work hours. Yep, we get that, Mark. Very, very cool. They have every right to go down to Madison and do their protesting, and some of them did, and some of them chose not to. That was the way it goes. But we didn't have issues about people doing anything improper or using email or anything like that. They just wanted to know that we had no problem with them exercising their rights, and I certainly don't. It was a distraction, though. You can't deny that whenever an organization is going through that, and any private company that's having financial woes, I would imagine that the productivity goes down a little bit because of all the uncertainty. But then maybe they're working harder to show that their value is there too. And I think some of our employees have said, look, we need to demonstrate that we are valuable, that we do provide a much needed service. So it's good to hear that. It's always good to hear good news about our employees.
Absolutely. Well, let me take a look here at some of Dan's questions. Here's one. Please explain your working relationship to Mayor Burke Tower. In the campaign, Tower said that he wanted to become more involved as a mayor, but really as mayor, because it is a ceremonial kind of position, there's really only two duties, and that's to, chair the meetings and make appointments to boards and commissions. So he is asking if you know what he thinks his intent is to be more involved, and specifically, he said as mayor he wanted to jumpstart the renovation of the City Center Hotel and the Pioneer Inn. And that's great. I mean, that's a noble thing to do, and certainly something that's long overdue, but what is he able to do more than what you've been able to do thus far? I mean, is there anything?
I think working cooperatively helps. Mayor has made a point of having bi-weekly meetings with me just before council meetings to go through the issues to make sure he has a good understanding of the issue, that makes sure that any questions that he has, he lets me know about, so that when we get to the meeting, we're conducting business. We're not answering questions that we can get answered. And sometimes he'll say, I'd like to answer. I'm going to make sure I ask that again, because I want the public to be aware of those questions, and that's entirely appropriate. We've had fun. We went over to Hardee's over by City Hall one morning to have our meeting, and people come up and they chat with us and they tell us things, and jointly hearing those things I think helps a lot. And so the mayor's been doing those types of things. With respect to City Center, even though he doesn't have a specific role from the administrative standpoint, he does have a bully pulpit that every elected official has. And I think if he can, if people can approach him and talk to him about these issues, and if they can talk to him better than they can talk to me, that's wonderful. And so he's had people approach him with suggestions, ideas. Have you tried this? Have you looked at that? And those are the types of things. And when he hears things, he comes to me and here's what I've heard. What have you heard? And we spend time collaborating on what we're hearing and then strategizing from that. And I think that's helped help the staff understand what they need and what the council expects from them. Make it more of a business meeting. The mayor has specifically said he wants to make it more of a business meeting. And so we're trying to make sure that we redouble our efforts to make sure that the package of information the council gets, 200 to 300 pages they get every Friday for the following Tuesday meeting. It's an awful lot to go through. So anything we can do to help them assimilate those 200-300 pages, short of sleeping on the pillow and hoping it's osmosis, we want to do that. And so if we can focus in on the issues or highlight the major issues that are coming up, if we're aware of something coming from the public, we can let them know. If they're aware of something from the public, they can let us know, so that there are minimal surprises and more answers at a council meeting. And I think that's what we've been doing.
So it's really more of a hands-on, if you will, with the citizenry and a collaborative effort with you than it is, Burke Tower going out there and trying to develop some kind of a working relationship on his own with these Canadian owners of the City Center Hotel.
Yeah, that's not
Okay.
that's
All
not
right.
his thing.
Okay.
And he recognizes that. And but when he hears things, he makes sure I know about it, so that I've got all the information in front of me. And conversely, when I know of issues that are going to require council input or approval, I let them know. And now there's a lot of people that, whenever a story runs in the paper, the paper's just doing their job of updating. What's the latest? Well, there's not much to report. So he does a story. When you don't have much to report, you still got to report something. So there's not much, and there's an immediate conclusion that because the newspaper did a story that council's going to be approving a TIF next week for a project. Well, nothing further could be from the truth. We haven't even started a process for anything like that. But I do say, if a TIF would be formed, this is how it would have to be done. And so I try to explain the parameters. Just because I explain the parameters doesn't mean it's happening next week.
Mm-hmm.
If there's 10 steps to the process for a TIF, we haven't even finished step 1. I mean, we're so far away from it. That's the good news and the bad news at the same time.
Sure. Well, since we are on the subject of City Center, now it's under new ownership. Is it a cousin of the people who owned it before? Is that what it is? It's a relative, though, right?
The brother, it was jointly owned by Nash and Shinder Gill. Now it's owned exclusively by Shinder Gill and his cousin. So
Okay.
I'm not sure what his ownership interest is, but they both came and said Nash took this one hotel and Shinder took the city center, but now his cousin Hadip is involved in it. So they were the two.
You know how it looks to some of us? It looks like a bait and switch kind of thing.
I don't think anything's really changed.
Yeah.
Call it bait and switch, call it nothing's changed. I would say it's probably closer to nothing's really changed. They told the paper that they had something going on with financing. I haven't seen that yet. Before we even look at something like this, number one, I've always said it's got to be an improvement that is on par with the convention center investment. We just can't say, well, we're going to give you money because you're going to put new bedspreads on the bed. It's got to be more than that. It has to be a full renovation. I do give credit to Jeff Beaulieu from the Northwestern going over there and spending a couple nights at the hotel.
Yeah.
Hotels get tired.
Yeah.
I've got favorite chains that I've gone to over the years. And, when I've traveled, I know this hotel. I'm not going to say any names. I don't want to do commercials tonight. But, Hotel X I'm going to because I've been there. And then you go there 3-4 times and you realize, it's starting to get a little tired. Hotels get tired. That's just the name of the game. Even your favorite hotels get tired. And you have to renovate them. This hotel has not been renovated in 25 years. And it should have been turned over twice, let alone once.
Yeah.
And so when it gets tired and it doesn't get done, it gets really tired. Now it's exhausted. They need to completely redo a lot of things in that hotel. Deferred maintenance as well as just making it look pretty.
Well, now they said that, they had, what was it, $2 million that they were ready to put into it, that they had this financing arranged. Have they pulled any permits to start doing any work?
None at all.
Because they were quoted in the paper, I thought, as saying that they were going to start that we'd see something in May, I thought they said.
Yeah, and
You
I
know.
believe it's May.
It's almost the end of May as we tape this, or at least it's the middle of the month. But if they've not even pulled a permit yet, I mean, that's, again, it just seems like more of the same and nothing happening, like you said.
And if I can use this opportunity to explain TIF a little bit, there's
Sure.
a lot of rules that go into a TIF. And one of the things that's extremely important is the TIF is always, there's a snapshot of the TIF. The base year is when they say, okay, this is when you're as low as you can go, and then you start growing from there. And its snapshot is taken as of January 1st of a given year. And if they don't work with, and if the TIF was formed today, now normally it requires like a 45 to 60 day forming period. Our 45 to 60 day period has not even started. Like I said, we're not even on step one yet. But if we could magically form it today, or even 45 to 60 days from now, the value would be based as of January 1st, 2011. And that would be good. If this TIF gets dragged out and it gets formed after late September, I believe it's September 20th, anything after September 20th, the creation date is moved forward to January 1, 2012. So then the base is whatever it is on January 1, 2012. If he does, as he maybe suggested, that he's doing things already, whether he got a permit or not, irrelevant. If he puts things in now, but he doesn't give us the information that we can get a TIF reviewed and approved, if we like it, all the investment he puts in this year doesn't count in the base. In fact, it's added to the base, so it's not increment. So the base goes up, but the base does not help fund TIF improvements, which means that money can't be used to help them.
So TIF improvements, TIF dollars are based on assessed value? Would that be?
It's based on assessed value of the increased value. So if your base is higher, that doesn't increase the increment. You have to do it. You have to start investing in the property, or you have to start the TIF as low as it can possibly go. And I think we've reached that level at the city center. But if he puts improvements in before the TIF's formed, he won't be able to take advantage of those. And what you do is say, look, you're going to put extra money into it, your value is going to go up, you're going to pay more taxes on it, we're going to take those taxes and effectively give them back to you in the form of a grant or some improvement incentive. But if you've already done the work and the TIF's done, can't happen. If you started putting a bunch of improvements in and had a TIF form 5 years from now, you would understand, well, how can you possibly take credit for those things? You did them 5 years ago. Well, 5 years, 1 month, it doesn't matter. If you do it before the TIF's formed and it's not pushed back retroactively, you're out of luck. And that's going to be, and we need a lot of information from any applicant for a TIF. It's a 45 to 60 day period, assuming that the application is complete and in great shape. It's not even submitted, let alone be complete and in great shape. So that's a real problem.
Well, let's talk about another hotel that's not in such great shape, the Pioneer Inn. What in the world is happening with that, if anything? And the second part of that, Mark, would be, what can the city do, if anything more at this point, to kind of jumpstart this thing or put some fire under the feet of, is it still owned by Decade Properties?
Still owned by Decade Properties. Decade Properties, they're a very well-heeled company. It's not that they don't have the money, but I don't think they see the advantage of developing anything there in this economy as it exists right now. When it was first being discussed about 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, the idea was to do condos and sort of condo hotel. Well, that concept isn't working these days. It's not a good financing mechanism. I don't know, he probably could fund a lot of this improvement himself, but I don't think he considers it a good investment at this time to invest money in the hotel. I think he still views the property as a good investment, so he's just holding it. So the only thing we can do right now is enforce code violations. And so that's what we're looking at doing. And if there's graffiti out there, we can have them take care of that. Grass not mowed, we can do that. Disrepair, we can do that. Interestingly enough, I'll get on the stump about some legislation that the legislator has been putting through. And they put some legislation through that would make it even harder for us to do something. A lot of people say, well, you should just buy it. This law...
With what?
Well, assuming we had pixie dust money,
Yeah.
we cannot, under this new law, we would not even be able to buy the Pioneer. So there's laws being changed right now at the legislative level that would prevent us from purchasing land for redevelopment, in which case we would turn around and sell it to another developer. That would be virtually prohibited. I believe it's SB 93 and SB 90 that are going through the legislature. Couple legislators, none from this area, are on board with it. I respectfully disagree with that. So they're tying our hands even farther.
I was going to say, is this something that has started just with the Walker administration, or did this start before that?
Oh, it probably existed before the Walker administration. It's not being proposed by the governor. It's being proposed by some legislators. But I think it's a Republican initiative, and I just respectfully disagree. I think they feel that they're helping protect private property rights, and I have a great deal of respect for that, and that's why we follow the letter of the law. In fact, that's why, even if that law didn't exist, that's why we're not out there running out buying properties willy-nilly, because there's a certain process that you need to go through, and we don't take that lightly. We just don't go out and buy properties and say, get out of here, you know, like we're kicking grandmas out of their homes to make developers rich. And this person has the resources to do this. I don't know if you would necessarily find a better person that would do a hotel there than Decade Properties. They just don't feel they're in a position, and they've said, if you can get somebody that's willing to do what they want to do, tell me what they want to do, and I'll listen to them. But nobody's stepping forward.
See, to my way of thinking, and I'm not a hotel owner, so I don't know, but it seems to me that with a beautifully renovated convention center right across the river, you know, a hop, skip, and a jump from Keeney Island, which is where the hotel is, and just across the street also from the convention center is City Center that's in such bad disrepair you can't find people who are willing to really stay there. In my mind, it seems that that would be the perfect place to do something, you know, fix the place up. You've got this convention center right there. People, you know, they'd be staying there. I mean, that's the logic that I'm thinking of.
From their market standpoint, I guess they look at it differently, and I'm not an expert in the hotel market, so I really can't.
We're not hoteliers, are we?
If we were, we'd be running down the street
we could
doing
go
that
do
ourselves.
something about it. Well, how does this new law that you talked about, Mark, factor in with eminent domain? If the city knew of someone who was going to come in there and do something, could you enforce eminent domain in some way, or does that sort of preclude you from doing that too?
Under the new law, you'd have to demonstrate that it would take more than 50% of the value to improve the property. And you can make an easy case that you don't have to completely renovate the hotel. You can just get up to code very easily.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot to get up to minimum code.
Yeah.
But minimum code isn't the hotel that you and I envisioned for that site.
Yeah.
So we would have to demonstrate that they would have to spend more than 50% of the value of the current property, and it's probably valued anywhere from at a minimum $3 million, and he wouldn't take probably anything less than $13 million for it. So depending on where you pick that number, 50% of the value to improve it. Well, if it only costs $1 million to improve it to meet minimum code requirements, then we wouldn't be able to purchase it in the first place. So there's formulas that are built into this law, but it's intended so that we aren't out there just buying up property and pushing old ladies out of their homes. That's not our intent, but there's the potential abuses of the law have been painted so broadly that people say, we have to correct these problems. They don't exist in Oshkosh, and I don't think they exist anywhere in the valley. So maybe they exist in Milwaukee or Madison, but they certainly don't exist here in Oshkosh. So to me, it's fixing a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Has the property, Mark, been the recipient of a fair amount of code violations, or not so much?
That's probably something we probably haven't done enough of. Part of it is a lot of it's facing the waterfront, unless somebody's out there, and we don't have a code enforcement boat. So we really rely on people saying, you need to take a look at this because we cannot enter the property. It's private property unless we get permission. We've never been granted permission to enter the property for a variety of reasons. They've just never granted us the permission. So we get somebody from a boat that reports it or gives us a picture. Then we can talk to the marina manager. The marina is still being operated out there by Decade Properties, so we try to bring it to their attention. But mowing, by the time you get around to it, it still looks shabby. When it goes past 3-4 inches, it looks shabby. It doesn't violate a code until it's 6 to 8 inches. So we have to wait for it to get uglier than ugly, and then force through it. It's a very time-consuming process.
Sure.
And that gets frustrating. We would like them to at least maintain it in some type of passive park-like setting at least, so people don't have to be grading on them when you get a member of the public. I can't tell you how many times people have gotten frustrated with that. The mayor's obviously frustrated. I'm frustrated, but there's limited things we can do, and we don't want to push too hard where it's there's a concept known as inverse condemnation, where you do things to kind of make the people have to condemn their property, and you can't do that either. So we have to be cautious about if we push too hard, we could be accused of inverse condemnation.
Oh, okay. More good news, huh?
Yeah.
One of Dan's other questions here, well, a couple of them, they have to deal with the library. And I'm just going to read this because I haven't had a chance to really look this over. A couple safety concerns. Well, number one, this doesn't have to do with the library so much. The vulnerability of disabled Oshkosh citizens in their motorized carts. They have no reflectors, no vests, and no poles to protect them, especially after dark or in the winter when they must drive on the streets because of too much snow on the corners. So that's one concern of Dan's.
Snow on the corners is a concern. We've been enforcing that more. What we try to do is to get our transit employees, because a lot of disabled folks take the bus, and try to identify who we know, where our customers are, and understand our customers.
Sure.
The corner of my house, I live on a corner. I don't know if there's a disabled person there, but certainly not on a bus route. Maybe that's not a high priority, but I take care of mine. For the people who don't, we want to make sure that we go after those ones that we know people are using, and we're pretty aggressive on pursuing those ones. But we do have to rely on the public. We don't actively pursue those, but if we know that there's a standing problem or a continuous problem, we're going out there and removing the snow right away and sending a bill to the property owner. We'd prefer that they would do it themselves, but we're just going to have to resign ourselves to that.
Sure.
The reflective stuff, that's going to be up to the individual.
The individual. Okay. All right. Now the library. Let's see. He's wanting to know if you've ever attended one of their used book sales in their basement. He says it's a fire trap, and he cannot believe it would ever pass any city fire code. So he's quit going. And he said on his observation about the basement of the library being a fire trap, he said the only way in is a small elevator that holds 5 people. And he says people are lined up to go down to the basement and then lined up again to go back up to the first floor. And there are dozens of people at the used book sale, and he's never seen any other exits. So this is a concern of his, he says.
Yeah, it's a trick question. It's a no-win question. Have you ever gone to the used book sale? Okay, I have to now admit on TV that I have not been to the used book sale. So I'm a loser no matter what. I say I've never been there, or yes, I've been there, and I've seen this violation. I guess I'll have to check with Jeff Gilders and do it at the library. I guess what that says is people love the library, and then when they have a used book sale, boy, do people come.
They're coming out in droves.
Yeah, so we got to check that out.
All right. Okay, we touched on the recycling thing before, and I don't want to get into it a whole lot again, but, if the city loses some of this recycling money, what's going to happen to the recycling program? Now, we just spent money on, automated trucks, and all of us bought our real popular big blue bins, and now our recycling program is possibly going to suffer. So, but it's not going to be done away with, correct?
We can't do away with it because we're still mandated, even though the state says it's not mandated. It's still mandated because we don't have to collect anymore, but we still can't send the recyclables to the landfill. So Yeah, we still have the mandate.
Are we still moving forward? I know when you were on last, we talked about the possibility of automating the regular garbage pickup, the stuff that's not recyclable. With these kinds of cuts that we talked about at the outset of the program, are we still looking at doing something like that, or is that kind of in a holding pattern right now?
Well, I gave it some thought for a while because I was, I wish if they were going to do this to us, they would have said this a year ago before we started getting into the recycling program. But now we're into the recycling program. And I think you remember me saying, no other community that I'm aware of did recycling first and refuse second. They usually did refuse first, recycling second. So it really put me in a quandary. And after giving it some thought, I still look back to all the savings we had and saying, you know what, it still makes sense to do the automated refuse. We may want to take a look at what options are for service provision, but assuming that we maintain the program as is, we got to consider, do we contract for some or all of it? I think we need to go to single stream, or we need to go to the automated refuse, regardless of the answer to the first question. Are there other ways to deliver the service? And then that issue came up many years ago, and it's going to have to be thrown out on the table. Is it appropriate to charge a fee for that? I'm not suggesting it right now, but I think the community has to have an honest discussion. What are your alternatives, and is charging a fee for refuse that unacceptable when the other alternatives are there? I think all those things have to be out on the table.
See, that's the problem with what's going on in Madison, is they sit there and say, we're not going to raise your taxes, but you're still ending up imposing taxes in the way of fees. And so here we go again, and I know you're not proposing it, and it's just something that, you just mentioned in sort of passing here, but it's a fee that's now being talked about. And I know, sure as you and I are both sitting here, Mark, that's not going to be the only fee that is talked about, whether it be from the city, the county, the schools. Somebody somewhere is going to raise that ugly word again, fees.
Yeah. We're going to have to make cuts. When you have a $2 million cut in state aid, net $1 million plus all the other problems, I'm looking at $1.2 million to $1.5 million. I can't just say, I'm going to take it all through fees. That's just not even close. I think if I doubled all our fees, it would save a little bit on the tax bill. Fees are not the cure-all for everything we have. You've got to be very measured in how you do that. We got to have an honest discussion about it. I think the discussions that also have to take place there, and it's going to take place between the business community and the residents. The service is primarily for residents. It's not for businesses. So the business community could make a statement that, well, I may not like it as a single-family property owner in the city, but as a business person, I think you should charge a fee, because then I won't be paying for refuse. Right now, businesses are paying for refuse. Businesses are paying for recycling.
Yeah.
They really are, because it's being paid for out of taxes. So that debate is going to have to take place.
Sure. Well, and on this same subject, there was talk for a while, and maybe it's still sort of being bandied about some kind of an ordinance restricting where these blue bins have to go. Now, if we end up getting some other color bin for just our regular non-recyclable refuse, we're going to have to find a place for those to go as well. What's happening with that enforcement or that ordinance?
I have that draft ordinance. It was delivered to me just this week, so I wanted to get it going before July 1. So you're probably going to see it in June, because we've got to do something about that, because there are some people who just don't get it. And I know it's tough in some areas, and the people who probably complain to me are the people I'm least worried about, because they're the ones that care enough to complain.
Yeah.
It's the people who will never call me, and they've got their blue bin in their front yard and they have no intention of moving it. To me, that's irresponsible.
So give us a heads up on what we can look for.
I'm still looking for it. It's gonna, we're going to, obviously, we need to be practical about allowing it outside. I think we just want to keep it out of the front yard. That's really the main thing. The real issue is going to be the side yards for people that live on corners. That's going to be the real tough one.
That is going to be the tough part of it.
So we're going to have to look at some type of setback and things like that, and it probably depend on the size of the yard and things of that nature.
Okay.
But Kevin's drawn it up, and I'm
Okay.
reviewing it.
All right, talking about yards, the council earlier this year passed an ordinance allowing backyard chickens to be raised. How many people so far do you know have applied for a permit to raise chickens?
I'm not aware that anyone's applied yet. Part of the issue made it tougher was that there's a requirement that you need to get your neighbors. There's a potential that people who already have chickens may still stay underground on that issue, and I don't mean to sound, it sounds interesting but intriguing, but some people may not want to go and ask their neighbors about something that has not bothered them for years. But
Or they may not get along with one of their neighbors, or both, or whatever.
and here's a way to get back. I mean, animal issues, over my years in city management, it's amazing how animal issues divide neighbors, and this is a potential for one. So I haven't seen any yet. The ordinance doesn't technically go into effect until the 1st of July. We may see them coming forward in June, but so far I haven't seen any, but there may be some inquiries that have been made.
Yeah, see, I didn't have a real strong feeling one way or the other on that issue, but, kind of hamstringing someone who wants to raise chickens by having them have to get permission from their neighbors, I think that that's giving your neighbors a little bit more say-so over your own property rights than they're entitled to have. And so, maybe at some point when we don't have bigger fish to fry, the council can look at that again and revisit that issue.
Need bigger eggs to fry.
Eggs to fry, yeah. Water rates, real quickly. Now, there's a portion of our water bill rate that's going to be going up because not as much water has been used in the past.
That's a small portion of
Okay.
it. We've done a lot of street projects, which we've done a lot of water projects. We've invested a great deal in our water system. Anytime you increase the assets of your water system, which we have with new mains, that the formula that the Public Service Commission adopts raises the rates. We've done some renovations at the treatment plant in the last few years. Those hadn't been factored in yet. So those are probably more contributing factors than anything, but you are correct that when there's less usage, and a lot of times when we lose an industrial customer is usually when you really take that hit, then the water rates, the amount of money that the utility needs to collect to operate the utility remains relatively the same, but the distribution goes from industrial to residential because you have, if you have one big industrial client that goes away, the proportion of the costs shift.
Yeah. Doesn't do much to encourage people to try and save on water use, though.
Oh, we hope they do. Yeah.
All right. Well, our time is just about up. I just want to remind people of one thing, though. The Parks Department is conducting a survey. It's online at the city's website. You've got until May 31st to complete the survey. So please do that, and go ahead.
May 26th, the Parks Board is also going to be holding an informational session for people to come in and comment on that as well. So you do the survey and come in, check the city's website. I believe it's on the May 26th early evening.
Okay,
so, yeah,
great.
Check it out.
So visit the city's website to do both of those. So anyway, thanks for being here. We always run out of time. I've got more questions, and we just don't have enough time.
Oh,
But
I know.
I think we covered the more salient points, I think.
Well,
so
that'll get me back.
All right. Thanks, Mark. It's
All
always
right.
a pleasure.
Thanks,
All right,
Cheryl.
that's going to do it for us. We will see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.